Good afternoon. Thank you again for joining us for the Winter Weather and Wildfire webinar. Texas is currently experiencing La Nina conditions, no matter how icy it is outside, and they are forecasted to continue through the winter and spring. La Nina conditions historically translate into warmer than normal and drier than normal conditions for Texas during the winter and spring fire seasons. Texas has historically experienced increased wildfire response and more severe wildfires during La Nina conditions in the past. Our state resources have already begun responding to wildfires across the state this season. The goal of this webinar is to help Texas media and meteorologists better inform Texans on wildfire potential in their local broadcast area and help provide wildfire preparedness information to the public. Our presenters are open to questions, which will be answered at the end. Please place your questions in the Q&A chat, the icon for which can be found near the top right side of your screen. Attendees will not be able to be unmuted. Here's a look at today's agenda. We anticipate the webinar to be no longer than 1 hour. If you can't stay for the entire presentation, we will be recording the webinar and it will be available on our website early next week. Later this week, we will email you a toolkit that includes a link to the webinar recording, resources covered, and contact information. For a bit about who we are, Texas A&M Forest Service was created by the Texas Legislature in 1915. We are the state forestry agency for Texas. We conserve forests, trees, and natural resources of the state and protect lives and property from wildfire and all hazard incidents. Texas A&M Forest Service is the lead agency for wildfire suppression and one of the lead agencies for incident management. From the initial response to ongoing recovery, our agency strives to protect Texas from the wildfire and other types of disasters, both natural and man-made. Now, if you're wondering why it's Texas A&M Forest Service and not Texas Forest Service, it's because we are a member of the Texas A&M University system and fulfill the service component of this land grant system. We're one of only 5 state forestry agencies in higher education. Our featured speakers today are myself, Carrie Hines, Program Coordinator with the Mitigation and Prevention Department. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Forestry from Northern Arizona University. I have been with the Texas A&M Forest Service since 2012, first as an inventory forester and then starting in 2014 with the Mitigation and Prevention Department. Outside of my wildland fire credentials, I hold a certified arborist qualification through the International Society of Arboriculture. I love being able to help people realize their wildfire risks and learn how to protect themselves, their families, and communities, all while balancing the environmental needs of their properties. I live in Central Texas with my family. Next, we have Luke Kanslers, who is a wildfire analyst. Luke has served with the Texas A&M Forest Service since 2012. He began his career in the Mitigation and Prevention Department, working with communities and fire departments on wildfire preparedness and prevention programs. Since 2015, Luke has supported the Predictive Services Department by helping produce decision support products and fire potential forecasts about the Texas wildfire environment. Luke is also involved in wildland fire suppression operations across the state and has worked on several fire assignments across the country. And finally, we'll hear from Brad Smith. Brad is our Predictive Services Department head. Brad has been a wildland firefighter and active participant in the wildland fire community since 1980. He joined the Texas A&M Forest Service Predictive Services Department in 2000 and has worked to identify and communicate wildland fire potential and risk to firefighters from across the state. Brad has been a part of the national fire management teams and regional decision support teams providing for fire information forecasts for individual wildfires or fire potential forecasts for geographic regions. He has also served as a member of the National Predictive Services Working Group, a cadre member of the Advanced Fire Behavior Interpretation course, and currently represents the Eastern States on the National Fire Danger Rating System Committee. With that, I will quickly be covering some basics on how you, as our partners in media and weather forecasting, can help prepare Texans for wildfire. To start with, we'll do a quick definitions for prevention versus preparedness. Prevention relates to trying to stop an activity, in this case, a wildfire, from ever starting to begin with. And preparedness relates back to being prepared for that activity if and when it occurs. As meteorologists, you can help spread prevention messages to your audiences. Specific messages can be tied with different times of the year, common activities in your viewing area, and specific weather forecasts. Your partners here at the Texas A&M Forest Service will be reaching out to you throughout the year with different prevention messages. Another way you can help spread the information that we would like to give to the public is with preparedness information. We use a national program called Ready, Set, Go to spread information on how people can be prepared for wildfire. We would like to encourage people to always be prepared for emergencies, and in particular, evacuations when it comes to fast-moving wildfires. There's some information there on your screen about some messages that you in the media can help share. Now we'll pass it over to Luke to cover expected winter and spring fire season information.
Thanks, Carrie. Appreciate that. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I know you have a lot on your plate with the impending winter weather that's practically impacting most of the state. And you know, Brad and I were kind of chatting beforehand that, you know, it's like, gosh, you know, it's like it's definitely not quite the fire environment conducive to a lot of fire activity, but you know, looking at some of the, 2011 stands out that in February there were some record cold temperatures across parts of the state, including some winter weather and ice that happened in South Texas in mid-February. And then, 2011 turned out to be a very historic fire season. And so there's still plenty of time left in this dormant winter fire season for us to see quite a bit of fire activity. And when we're building our dormant season fire potential, we look at 4 factors, and some of that is our seasonal and temperature precipitation trends, which hinges on La Nina or the El Nino cycle. And then our drought trends, are we emerging, or do we see drought persisting that's carried over from the previous summer and fall, or is drought improving? And then what's our fine fuel condition? How much grass we produce during the growing season, and how much of that grass is going to carry over through the dormant season, particularly in our grass dominant regions for areas generally along and west of I-35. And then finally, what's the risk of high impact fire weather, and particularly Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks? So the Climate Prediction Center extended their La Nina advisory that came out today. And the La Nina's advisory has been present since the fall of 2020. And the latest update is that there's a 60% chance of transitioning to neutral on that April to June timeframe. And, it's hard to say if it's going to transition, in April or late June. So we could see those La Nina conditions persist, over the next several months. A lot of La Nina conditions generally translate to the warmer and drier conditions across Texas, especially during the winter and spring. And oftentimes that can enhance the likelihood of the state experiencing high impact fire weather events, especially the potential for Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks. So we look at the precipitation and temperature outlook, and this is from the Climate Prediction Center back on January 21st. I believe the next update will come out next week on the 18th, but it's trending with the La Nina forecast, and that's consistent for those warmer and drier conditions across Texas. I'm curious to see what the update will be that comes out next week, but I think we'll still continue to see that potential for that warmer and drier conditions to at least the next several months. Another consideration is the analogs. What if we have these moderate to strong La Nina, and we look at previous periods, particularly that February through April. If we're looking at the temperature and precipitation, how does that compare to, what we might see from previous years? And so looking at 2008, 2011, 2012, and 2018, those were periods when we had a moderate to strong La Nina in that February through April timeframe. And you can see that our temperatures were generally above normal. We had that standard deviation warmer than normal. And then our precipitation, somewhat drier than normal, especially across the western plains of Texas and into South Texas as well. So that just helped us build that confidence of increasing warmer and drier conditions across the state going through this dormant fire season. So how do the warmer and drier conditions relate to fire activity across the state? Well, often we see during La Nina fire seasons, a lot more acres burned. If we look at the past 7 La Nina fire seasons compared to our non-La Nina fire seasons, we've had nearly 6 million acres burned over those 7 years when we had La Nina present, compared to just under 300,000 acres burned when we either neutral or had El Nino conditions present. So that just gives us that confidence that we could see quite a bit of fire activity and a lot of acres burned during this La Nina season. So with the drought consideration, kind of where do we stand compared to the other historic years? So, mid-February, back in 2011, we had 84% of the state in some form of abnormal dryness or drought. 2011, once again, a historic year for fire occurrence. And then if we look at February 7th, 2017, only 9% of the state was in drought. But as we move kind of mid-February to late February and into March, state was impacted by several high-impact fire weather events, produced multiple significant fires that were very impactful across the western plains of the state. So it kind of shows that drought's not a requirement to have increased fire activity, but it can definitely enhance it. And we look at the latest drought monitor update. We still have 74% of the state that's in some form of drought or abnormal dryness. And it was actually a little bit higher back in the fall, had quite a bit of dryness emerging in East Texas, but picked up here moisture at the end of 2020 and over the past several weeks since reduced some of that. But we're starting to see a little bit that abnormal dryness creep back into parts of North Texas, East Texas. But if you look further west, generally south and west Amarillo down toward Lubbock have extreme to exceptional drought, including areas around the Midland area into the Trans-Pecos region. And if we move further south in South Texas, down to the Rio Grande Valley, we do have a pretty decent sized pocket of extreme drought that is currently present. So, with that drought in mind, if we just have to kind of see how the next 7 to 10 days play out in terms of, whatever form of precipitation we receive and what the impacts are in terms of improving our drought. But with that drought that's still present on the landscape, it's a shorter period needed to dry back out and start seeing fire activity occur across the landscape. So looking at the February through April drought outlook, updated on the 21st, we'll see that update come out next week, but expect we'll see that drought persist across the western plains and the Trans-Pecos and parts of the hill country in South Texas. And then there's the drought development that we are seeing occur across parts of the high plains, a little bit into the hill country, including the capital region there in central Texas. And drought, it's typically been a significant factor in the past 6 of the past 7 La Nina years, especially when we get toward March, when that's normally our peak period of the dormant fire season. And so the next consideration is, how much grass do we have in our grass dominant regions. And you know, it's the why behind that, why that's important is it's pretty simply stated that wildfires burn hotter and faster when we have more grass available to burn. And so our grass loading is estimated based off the growing season rainfall. So generally May through September, when we look at the percent normal rainfall for that period, you know, either deficits, surpluses, or in between, you know, near normal, to kind of gauge how much grass may have been produced and that's likely to carry over through the dormant season. And we also do quite a bit of visual assessments. Brad Smith and I and others in our department do a lot of driving around across the state, documenting the grass loading that's present, comparing that to previous years to kind of give us an idea of what we can expect to carry over, you know, through the dormant season. And so if we look at our growing season grass production map, you can see there's quite a bit of a mix. Some above normal grass loading north of Amarillo, up along those upper tier counties toward Oklahoma. But as you move further south Amarillo, around Lubbock, down toward Midland, we have that below normal grass loading. And if you remember the drought map, where we had that severe to exceptional drought, we just didn't have a whole lot of rainfall during the growing season in that region. And so it just didn't have a lot of grass grow. And that's the same story for parts of the Trans-Pecos as well. But we did have kind of a late, some late season rainfall, quite a bit of rain there in early September. So we had a kind of a late surge of vigorous growth in this north central Texas area, to parts of the Rolling Plains, extending south, kind of near San Angelo. And the same goes for South Texas, where we have above normal grass loading generally listed. And areas in between, it's kind of that normal grass loading that we're seeing. And you know, one thing about below normal grass loading is that it can mitigate fire activity when we have elevated or critical fire weather events, but below normal grass loading will not mitigate fire activity when we have high impact fire weather events. So here's just a few images to kind of put in perspective and provide some context of what we're looking at with grass loading. And you know, here near Miami in Roberts County in the Panhandle, have the differences between grazed and ungrazed. So below normal, where we have higher intensity grazing, and then more of a normal grass loading where it's ungrazed. And mentioned that below normal grass loading is able to support that spread of fire when we have high impact or extreme fire weather events present. And Brad Smith took these photos on the Jackalope Fire, burned over 10,000 acres in October, north of Pampa. And it was some high-end critical fire weather that day, and drought cured grasses below normal grass loading, but the fire was able to spread very rapidly just because it had the continuity in that below normal grass loading. And then here's some examples of what we consider above normal grass loading, and mentioned that that's prevalent in that north central Texas area in South Texas, and near Mineral Wells, just west of Fort Worth. Here's an image of above normal grass loading. Visit this site probably several times a year over the past 5 years, and this is probably the most grass that I've seen present at that location. And this area had quite a bit of rain in early September, and we had that late vigorous growth occur. If we go further south to the Rio Grande River Valley, near Lynn, north of McAllen, just another example of above normal grass loading that we're seeing down in South Texas. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Brad Smith.
Well, howdy, y'all. Working here to, I'm hoping you're seeing my slides, and want to pass on what Luke said. It's kind of strange we're sitting here talking about fires on a day when winter weather advisories dominate the state. As Luke said, the La Nina conditions really haven't surfaced yet, but we do still have March and April ahead of us, and we do expect that we'll still see an active fire season this year. Wanted to, I didn't know who. Predictive Services is kind of a unique name. It's kind of unique to the fire agencies, maybe not with the Weather Service or meteorologists in general. And we started our Predictive Services unit with the Texas A&M Forest Service back in 1998. We were actually the first state agency to have a Predictive Services unit. And we actually dedicated at that time about 5 full-time employees to the department. And necessity always breeds whatever we come up with. And what we found is that we were being very reactive to fires in the state. Fires would occur, fire departments, local governments would need help, and they'd call us. And we were always seemed like we were chasing the fires. And we finally decided that we needed to be more proactive. We needed to get out in front of the fires and try to predict or forecast when and where they would occur, and that way we could provide resources into that area before the fires occurred and hopefully increase the response. So that's kind of what started Predictive Services. We started out with not a lot of stuff. One of our basics for our predictions are our weather stations, our weather network, fire weather network. We started out with maybe a handful of stations in the state. We're now up over 100 stations, and we use a combination of the RAWS, National Weather Service ASOS stations, and we've recently added about 45 West Texas MesNet platforms to our fire danger products. So it helps increase that resolution across the state, helps us, we hope, make better decisions on where that fire potential will be occurring. And, fires, I like this slide, the spectrum of wildfires, because not all fires are the same. There are fires that I would tend to call normal, occur when conditions are not extreme, the weather is not extreme, the vegetative dryness is not that great, and we still have fires occur, but local resources are able to handle them, and the resistance to control is on the low end. But as we dry out, as we see stronger weather come across the state, and during the dormant season, that's generally centered around frontal passages, dry frontal passages. See high winds, low RH, higher temperatures. We start seeing wildfires that tend toward the higher resistance to control. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. A phenomenon we call the Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks. I compare them to, most of us have heard of the Santa Ana winds out in California. And whenever we see a forecast for strong Santa Anas in Southern California, we naturally think of large, fast-moving wildfires in that brush country. Well, the Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks are our rendition of the Santa Ana occurrence in Southern California. It's the same type of high-impact fire weather that produces a lot of dangerous, fast-moving fires. And the fires that we're going to be talking about, we call significant wildfires. They're large, they move very fast, sometimes in that 6 to 7 mile per hour range, and they're very difficult to control. They take a lot of resources and generally take a couple of days at minimum to get under control. One of the first, or actually the first year that we saw this phenomenon or took notice of it was back in 2006. And I like to use this slide. The day the Panhandle burned, it was March 12th of 2006, a strong La Nina year. And you can see the Amarillo Globe, the headline of the day the Panhandle burned. And it really highlights some of the impacts that we observed on that day. There were fatalities, not only from the fire, but a lot of times the fatalities occurred on the road because of the smoke and people getting disoriented. They were very large fires. We called it the East Amarillo Complex. And when it was all said and done, there were north of 800,000 acres that burned in those 2 days. Homes were destroyed, structures, barns, not to mention fencing. Skellytown, south of Borger, was a town that was directly in the path of one of these wildfires. People had to flee, And fortunately, local firefighters were able to kind of herd that fire around the town, and there was not loss of life or a lot of structures that were burned, but very impactful. In that slide that Luke showed, showing that La Nina years, we see a lot more acres burned, we can directly relate that to this Southern Plains wildfire outbreak. These outbreaks occurred during La Nina years, much more common during the La Nina years, and that accounts for the huge increase in acreage during La Nina years. So what I'm getting ready to show you here is just a loop of a video Luke showed you in 2017, one of his drought maps. It did not have much drought on it, but it was still a La Nina year, and we did still see the Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks occur. And this is what you're looking at. March 6th was actually the first day that GOES 16 went operational. And so that's what you're looking at, the GOES 16 image. And we were actually using it as a tactical tool that day to help us figure out where these fires were going, what they might impact. So you see the fires up in northwest Oklahoma, and they burned up into Kansas. A huge, I think 800,000 acres burned in this complex of fires. And in Texas that day, we had 3 large wildfires that occurred. The first one broke just north of Amarillo, called the Dumas Complex. I was actually on this fire. It started right off Highway 287, just north of Amarillo. Later in the day, we had what we called the Perryton Fire. This fire, I forget the total acreage, I want to say 350,000, and probably burned west to east, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 miles. And this is the fire that directly threatened the town of Higgins over in Lipscomb County. And I was working with, even though I wasn't on the fire, the National Weather Service in Midland, Greg Murdoch, was watching the satellite. We were trying to estimate the time of impact, if you will, that fire would move into Higgins. Fortunately, as you can see on the satellite, the cold front, the prefrontal conditions is where the fire was first burning with the west winds. Eventually the cold front came with the northwest winds, and you can see the fire move south into the east right about now. That push south and east from the cold front moved the fire just enough that it missed Higgins. So a silver lining to that day. But one thing to notice on a Southern Plains wildfire outbreak day, this high impact fire weather, it's a regional phenomenon. It's not a local one. And total acreage on this day was easily 1.5 million acres. And there's probably more stats as far as homes lost, structures lost. I know there were fatalities. This fire, the LaForest East fire, there were 3 young ranchers that lost their lives trying to move livestock out of the way of that fire. So very impactful, very dangerous. In fact, the Southern Plains wildfire outbreaks present the biggest threat as far as wildfires during the spring of La Nina years. It's the biggest threat we've seen with wildfires since I've been an employee of the Forest Service. So what you're looking at here, we mapped out all the Southern Plains outbreak fires on this map, and we looked at the outbreaks from 2005 to 2019. There were 28 outbreak days that occurred. And so you're seeing these big red dots, the largest dots, those fires are greater than 10,000 acres. And you can see that most of the fires, the large fires for sure, occur from, there's I-35 crossing into Oklahoma down toward Del Rio. And that's because most of this area out in Texas is dominated by grass. And the recipe for large wildfires during the winter season, the dormant season, is cured grasses and high winds associated with strong fronts. But what is really interesting, what we took note of, is that all these outbreak fires represent 3% of the fires reported from 2005 to 2019. but this 3% of our fires that were reported accounted for 49% of the acres burned. So it's a very significant occurrence. These Southern Plains outbreaks, they account for a large number of acres that burn. And when we see large numbers of acres burn, we have more interaction between fire and people. So there was two National Weather Service meteorologists that identified this pattern, and they built this composite map. Todd Lindley, whose name is on the photo, and then again, Greg Murdoch, senior forecaster there in Midland. They saw this pattern, they saw the results of the fires on the ground, and built this composite map. And it does have a large mid-level cyclone associated with it. You see the dew point front, the dry air, you see the trailing cold front, and then the arrows represent the upper level winds at the 700 level, or the 850 level, 700 level, and 500 level. And a lot of times our big events, they occur where a lot of these features intersect. And another feature not shown here, the low level thermal ridge, is a big key also. But most of the fires occur ahead of the cold front, behind the dew point or dry line, in this warm wedge of dry air with high winds and the prefrontal conditions. But the key is they can identify this, and we rely on them to help us identify these events when they're approaching. And we've gotten, we're never perfect, but we're getting better at it. And what you're looking at here is the working group, which consists of National Weather Service forecasters across 3 states, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, actually 4. I would include Dodge City up in Kansas. And then some of the fire agencies, ourselves, Texas Forest Service, Oklahoma Forest Service, and some of the fire agencies, BLM Forest Service out in New Mexico. But we can see these events possibly coming, 7 to 8 days out, just by looking at the models, basically identifying that strong mid-level cyclone. And as the event gets closer, we start defining the individual features that we look for. And this is the March 6, 2017 event, the forecast 2 days ahead of time. And we've gotten where we're doing a probabilistic forecast. And this 40% bubble, if you look over here, high impact fire weather is likely and a wildfire outbreak is possible. And that's when we're really confident that something's going to happen. It's probably going to happen in this area that we have outlined. And we do commit additional resources. We do spool up our information folks and media folks putting out this information because we definitely want the public to be aware of it. As I said, it's the biggest threat to public safety in as far as fires that we have. So we definitely want to let people know that it's coming and they can be prepared for that. There's a couple ways that we push this forecast out there. We do have a Predictive Services Facebook page, and just search for Predictive Services Texas A&M, and it should take you there. So we post information there. But probably the easiest way is we put out either weekly or bi-weekly a Texas Fire Potential Update, and the last one we pushed out Monday. And you can actually subscribe to this by sending an email to this address here. And I think we're going to share these slides with you so you don't have to write this down. You'll have it available to you and can subscribe to it. And the forecast is there 24/7. You can access it, but this is kind of nice because it lets you know when it has been updated. But if there is a forecast for the Southern Plains outbreak, it will be published in this Texas Fire Potential Update. And when we do see that 40 to 60% probability of high impact fire weather or an outbreak that is likely, this is kind of new this year, to our media partners, we'll be pushing this out called a wildfire alert. And we see that high wildfire potential, meaning that we know something's coming. And when we push this out, not only will we say it's a wildfire alert, but we can also tell you when and where that it's likely to happen. And Carrie, with that, I think I'll give it back to you.
Thanks so much, Brad. All right. And also thank you to Luke. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to briefly cover some of the resources that we've covered and some that we didn't, and then we'll go to the questions which have been coming in during the presentation. You, again, don't need to remember all of these resources or the answers to the questions. They'll be included, of course, in the webinar when it goes onto our website and a follow-up email. So here on the resources screen, we see some links. Brad mentioned the TIC website. You can see that there in the first bullet. Also available is some media resources. This page has some PSAs that go out and some contact information. Also tfswildfires.com. This website will show you all of the websites or all of the fires that we're currently responding to in the state. And finally, your local wildland urban interface coordinator. These are the people who will be serving most likely as your local public information officer when a fire does happen. Should also be the people you're receiving prevention and preparedness information from on a local level. We also, of course, do have social media, a Facebook page, a Twitter page, and information at tfs.tamu.edu will get you the information officer for the state at that point in time. Again, thank you for attending. If you would like to receive more information or follow-up questions, you can put your email there in the Q&A chat. These will stay private. Not everyone will be able to see those. And I am going to now start with the questions. The question will go to the person who can do their best job answering it. So our first question is, how does this spring compare to 2011? Currently, Predictive Services has above normal fire potential in the Rio Grande Valley. Is this affecting both ranch and urban land?
Go ahead, Luke. You need to unmute.
Yep. Carrie, can you repeat that just one more time, please?
Yeah. So how does this spring potentially compare to 2011? Predictive Services currently has above normal fire potential in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah, I mean, each year is it's always different in kind of how the fire season unfolds, and to say it's going to be like 2011, it wouldn't be an accurate statement just because each year is different with the fire environment. South Texas is unique in that, it's a lot, oftentimes the post-frontal fire environment is when we see an increase in fire activity. But, with the above normal grass loading that's present down there, the requirements to have increased fire activity or significant fires, less dryness, less, our fire weather thresholds could be lower just because of the amount of grass that's present. And, Brad, if you have anything to add to that.
No, that's it. This year, one of our biggest years in South Texas was actually 2008. We had a lot of tropical activity in summer of 2007, grew a lot of grass, and it was a La Nina year. So even though we don't get those prefrontal conditions in South Texas, we still see a lot of frontal activity pushing through the state. And as Luke said, that post-frontal environment, strong north winds, dry air, and a lot of grass will produce a lot of fires in South Texas. And we do expect that this year.
Thank you, Luke and Brad. Our next question is, how will COVID play into this year's potential fire seasons?
So COVID does complicate things. It makes it harder to bring in outside resources. On big fire years, we bring in firefighters from across the nation, and it's harder with COVID. We found this out last year to get people to travel, but we are doing things a little different this year. We are testing everybody that comes in. We have a bunch of rapid tests, and so we're hoping that we can mitigate some of the risk to firefighters from COVID by testing and catching it before we put them into the fire mix, if you will, in Texas. But it does complicate things. It makes things harder, and we'll have to deal with it again this spring and winter.
Thank you, Brad. Our next question is, how does the lack of livestock in some areas factor into the amount of fuels that have increased over the years?
Yeah, I mean, livestock is in grazing intensity. That's just part of the equation. When we're considering the amount of grass that's carried over into the dormant season, growing season rainfall is probably the biggest factor. If we have little or well below normal rainfall, during that May through September timeframe, we don't produce a lot of grass, then, grazing's not going to be a huge factor just because we'll have below normal grass loading on the landscape. But we have seen in years past, areas that there is a lot of grazing, that does tend to reduce that grass loading, especially as you go throughout the year and they do that rotations with the livestock on different, different parts of ranches.
I would add to that over the years we see land use changes. Texas used to be basically a farm state, and anymore a lot of livestock production acreage has been converted to maybe wildlife. You see these high fences going up all over the state. They generally don't have a livestock operation with those high fences. It's mostly wildlife, and so we see more areas that aren't grazed, I think, now than we saw 10, 15 years ago.
Thank you, Luke and Brad. The next question is, what can people do now to prepare for the upcoming fire seasons? And if you two don't protest, I'll probably take that one. So again, what can people do now to prepare for fire seasons? The first thing is just teaching people that we do have fire seasons, and that's one of the reasons we're here today, is to help spread information on what we're expecting. There are some simple things people can do depending on how much time they have. If you're looking days and weeks before a fire versus a fire is currently headed their way, those things often fall under the broad category of wildfire preparedness. We have entire sections of our website designed to that. We generally use two national programs. One is called Firewise USA, and the other is Ready, Set, Go. So those are both very good resources that anyone can open up a website and learn about. The other is, of course, learning what they can do to prevent wildfires. So if we don't have the fire to start to begin with, don't have to necessarily prepare as hard. Well, we have to prepare, but preventing them is also a great thing. So educating people, learning about some of those simple things they can do to work around their house. We know that 80% of home loss roughly is due to embers, and embers are little tricky pieces of burning material that find all the nooks and crannies around the house, and we know how to protect homes from that. So looks like our last question, I believe, unless let me make sure I'm not missing something. Oh, and thank you. A link just went into the Q&A to our website, Prepare Your Home for Wildfire link that has a lot of that information. So our last question, something that is specific to this attendees region: how does the rocky terrain in Crockett County, or Hill Country in general, differ when it comes to fighting fires from the Southern Plains, which are of course more flat?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brad and I we've both been on fires in Crockett County before, and the terrain is definitely more complex in that region. That rocky soil or rock that we see definitely can limit the ability for resources such as dozers, and engines to get in there and be really effective early on. And so, yeah, it definitely increases the complexity of our fire response in that area of Crockett County. And, Brad, I'm sure you have plenty more you can add to that.
Well, I think you said it well, Luke. It's a different terrain, a different coverage of vegetation. It's a mixture of brush and grass. In the high plains, it's mostly grass. And maybe one of the biggest differences we see, if it's mostly grass, we see a higher rate of spread. So the fire under high impact fire weather upon the plains may move 6 to 7 miles per hour. Whereas in the mixture of brush and grass, the juniper, mesquite, and grass and rocky terrain, it may cut that in half, maybe 3 to 4 miles per hour. But it doesn't matter. A fire in either location can be very difficult and threaten public safety.
All right, and we did have one more question. This one says, did the predictive services come out of the 2011 fires, or maybe what type of predictive services came out after the 2011 fires, and how will this help to prevent another 2011?
I'm not sure we can prevent another 2011. That's kind of out of our hands, but we will certainly be the Paul Revere and sounding the alarm, hopefully, if another 2011 does occur. And in fact, that's what we're trying to do this year. We've, since late 2020, with the advent of La Nina and the prediction for warmer than normal, drier than normal conditions, and our experience with past La Nina years, we think this year has the potential to be a significant fire year. It may not rise to the level of 2011. 2011 basically took up the whole year. It didn't stop at spring. It burned into the summer and then into the fall. But hopefully 21 will just be a winter-spring fire season. But we were born out of fire because we found out, talking a little earlier, we wanted to get out in front of the fire currents, not always be chasing it. We wanted to be proactive and not reactive. We wanted to provide tools to help folks be safe on the fire line, help the public recognize when danger was increased and take precautions. So hopefully that's what we do, and hopefully we can get better at it as years pass.
Wonderful, and I do believe that does it for our questions. Again, if you have any follow-ups, you can of course watch this webinar again and get some of those websites and contact information, or feel free to put your email into the Q&A. And of course, we do appreciate your partnership in educating the public. We know that 90% of wildfires in Texas are preventable, and that the more the public is exposed to prevention and wildfire causes and the weather conditions that are prime for ignitions, the more fires we can prevent and help protect the public, keeping Texans' lives and property as well as our firefighters safe. So again, thank you for joining us today. That will conclude our webinar.